On my 21st birthday, my grandmother whispered, "Your father didn't die in Afghanistan like they told you." The candles on my birthday cake flickered in the dim light of my grandmother's living room while everyone sang off-key. Mom stood behind me with her hands on my shoulders, squeezing a little too tight like she always did when she was trying to hold herself together. My younger sister Natalie was recording everything on her phone, and Uncle Dennis was already helping himself to a second slice before I'd even made a wish. It was supposed to be a small family celebration. Nothing fancy, just the people who'd been there through everything since Dad died when I was 6. I closed my eyes and was about to blow out the candles when Grandma Eleanor leaned in close, her papery hand gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Her breath smelled like peppermint tea and something medicinal as she whispered directly into my ear in a voice so low I almost missed it. "Your father didn't die in Afghanistan like they told you." The words hit me like cold water, and I opened my eyes to see her staring at me with an intensity I'd never seen before. Her usually warm expression had been replaced by something urgent and almost frightened, and her fingers dug into my wrist hard enough to leave marks. Everyone was still singing and clapping, completely oblivious to what had just happened. I looked at my mother, whose smile seemed frozen on her face, but her eyes were locked on Grandma Eleanor with an expression that made my stomach drop. It was fear mixed with warning, the kind of look that said, "Don't you dare," without speaking a word. Natalie was still filming everything, laughing and telling me to make a wish already because the wax was dripping onto the frosting. Uncle Dennis had started a conversation with my cousin about fantasy football standings. The normalcy of it all felt surreal against the earthquake that had just happened inside my head. I blew out the candles mechanically while my brain tried to process what Grandma had said and why she would say something so horrible on my birthday. My father was a hero who'd been killed by an IED while serving his country 15 years ago. We had the folded flag in a case on our mantel at home. We visited his grave every Memorial Day and on his birthday. Mom had raised us alone, working 2 jobs to keep us fed and housed, never remarrying because she said no one could replace the love of her life. The party continued around me while I sat there feeling like I was watching everything through thick glass. Mom cut the cake with shaking hands, and her smile never reached her eyes. She avoided looking at both me and Grandma Eleanor, keeping herself busy serving slices and refilling drinks. Natalie showed everyone the video she'd taken, rewinding to the moment I blew out the candles and narrating about how I looked like I was going to cry. Uncle Dennis launched into a story about the time Dad had beaten him at basketball despite being 5 inches shorter, a story I'd heard dozens of times before. Grandma Eleanor had retreated to her recliner in the corner and sat there watching me with those same urgent eyes, occasionally glancing at my mother with what looked like defiance. I excused myself to use the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror trying to calm my breathing. My reflection looked pale and my hands were trembling as I gripped the sides of the sink. What had Grandma meant? Was she getting confused because of her age? She was 78 and sometimes forgot things or mixed up names, but she'd never said anything this disturbing before. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to pull myself together before going back out. When I opened the bathroom door, Mom was standing right there in the hallway waiting for me. She grabbed my arm and pulled me into Grandma's bedroom, closing the door behind us. The room smelled like lavender and old books, and family photos covered every surface. "Don't listen to her," Mom said in a harsh whisper, her face closer to mine than was comfortable. "She's been having episodes lately. The doctor said it's early dementia, and she's been saying all kinds of crazy things that aren't true." I pulled my arm away from her grip and took a step back. "She seemed pretty clear about what she was saying, Mom." She looked right at me and she wasn't confused at all. Mom's face crumpled and she sat down hard on the edge of Grandma's bed. "Your father died in Afghanistan, sweetheart. You know that. You've seen the paperwork, the death certificate, the letters from his commanding officer. Why would I lie about something like that?" Her voice broke on the last words, and tears started running down her face. I'd seen my mother cry exactly 3 times in my life, and each time had been about Dad, so seeing her break down now made me want to take it all back and pretend Grandma hadn't said anything. But I couldn't unknow what I'd heard, and the way Mom had looked at Grandma Eleanor right after she'd said it told me there was more to this story. "Then why did she say it?" I asked, sitting down next to her on the bed. "If it's dementia, why would she make up that specific lie? Why not say he's coming home for dinner or that she saw him at the store?" Mom wiped her face with her hands and took a shuddering breath, because the mind plays tricks when it starts to go. "She probably mixed up your father with someone else, or she's confusing reality with a dream she had. It doesn't mean anything." She stood up and smoothed down her shirt, trying to compose herself. "We should get back out there before people start wondering where we went. It's your birthday, and I don't want it ruined by Eleanor's confusion." She left the bedroom without waiting for me to follow, and I sat there for another minute looking at the photos on Grandma's nightstand. There was one of my parents on their wedding day, both of them so young and happy. Another of Dad in his military uniform, the same photo we had hanging in our living room at home, and one I'd never seen before, tucked behind the others, showing Dad with severe scarring on the left side of his face and neck. I grabbed the photo and looked closer, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The scarring was extensive, covering most of his cheek and jaw with shiny, mottled skin that looked like melted wax. But it was definitely him. I could see it in his eyes and the shape of his nose. The photo had been taken somewhere with white walls and fluorescent lighting, maybe a hospital or medical facility. He wasn't smiling, and his eyes looked haunted in a way I'd never seen in any other picture of him. This photo had been taken after Afghanistan, after he was supposed to be dead. My hands shook as I slipped the picture into my pocket and walked back out to the party. Everyone was getting ready to leave, gathering up their coats and hugging Grandma goodbye. Natalie was boxing up leftover cake while Uncle Dennis helped clean up paper plates and plastic cups. Mom was at the door thanking everyone for coming, her public face firmly back in place like nothing had happened. I waited until everyone else had left before approaching Grandma Eleanor, who was still sitting in her recliner looking exhausted. "Grandma, I need you to tell me what you meant," I said quietly, kneeling down beside her chair so we were at eye level. "About Dad not dying. Please, I need to know the truth." She looked toward the kitchen where Mom was washing dishes with her back to us, then reached out and touched my face with her weathered hand. "Your father came home from that war, but he wasn't the same man who left. The things he saw, the things that happened to him over there, they broke something inside him that couldn't be fixed." Her voice was steady and clear, not confused at all. "He was burned so badly in an explosion that half his face was gone. They kept him in a military hospital for months doing surgeries, but he looked different after. And his mind was damaged too, from the trauma. He couldn't sleep without screaming, couldn't be around loud noises, couldn't look at himself in a mirror." She paused and glanced again at my mother. "He made your mother promise to tell you he'd died. Said it would be easier for everyone if he just disappeared. That you and your sister deserved better than a father who was more ghost than man." Mom appeared suddenly, dropping the dish she'd been washing and sending it crashing to the floor. "Mother, stop it right now," she said in a voice I'd never heard her use before, cold and dangerous. "You have no right to tell her these things." We agreed. We all agreed it was better this way. Grandma Eleanor pulled herself up straighter in her chair and met Mom's glare without flinching. "I'm dying, Rebecca. The cancer is in my bones now, and I've got maybe 3 months left. I won't go to my grave carrying this secret anymore. She deserves to know her father is alive." The room went silent except for the sound of Natalie dropping something in the kitchen, and I realized she'd been listening to everything. Mom's face had gone completely white, and she grabbed onto the doorframe like she needed it for support. "You're dying," her voice came out as barely a whisper. Grandma Eleanor nodded slowly. "Got the diagnosis last week. Stage 4, spread everywhere. They said treatment would just make my last months miserable, so I'm not doing it. I want to go peacefully at home." I stood up, my legs feeling weak beneath me. Everything I thought I knew about my life was crumbling around me like sand castles at high tide. "Where is he?" I asked, looking between my mother and grandmother. "If he's alive, where has he been all these years?" Neither of them answered at first, and the silence stretched out until Natalie came into the living room. "I want to know too," she said, her voice small but determined. "If Dad's alive, we have a right to know where he is." Mom sank down onto the couch and put her head in her hands. When she looked up, her face was streaked with tears, and she looked older than I'd ever seen her. "He's here, in this city. He's been here the whole time." The words hung in the air between us, and I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What do you mean he's been here? How is that possible? Why wouldn't he contact us?" Mom shook her head and wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "He did contact us. Or he tried to, in his own way. The birthday cards you girls got every year with no return address, those were from him. The anonymous donations to your college funds? Him. The flowers that appeared on our porch every Mother's Day? Your father left them." Natalie had started crying now, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor with her knees pulled up to her chest. "You let us think he was dead," she said between sobs. "We cried at his grave. We talked to a headstone. And he was alive the whole time?" I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and overwhelming. "How could you lie to us like that? How could you let us grow up thinking we'd lost him when he was right here?" Mom stood up and tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, not wanting her to touch me. "You don't understand what it was like," she said, her voice breaking. "When he came back, he was so damaged. The man I married was gone and someone else was living in his body. He couldn't work, couldn't function, had nightmares so bad he'd wake up swinging. He looked in the mirror one day and said he didn't recognize himself anymore. Said you girls shouldn't have to grow up with a monster for a father." Grandma Eleanor spoke up from her chair. "He made Rebecca choose. Either help him fake his death and raise you girls believing he was a hero, or watch him actually kill himself because he couldn't bear living with what he'd become. What choice did she have?" The anger drained out of me and was replaced by something heavier and sadder. I pulled out the photo I'd taken from Grandma's bedroom and held it up. "Is this him? After he came back?" Mom's face crumpled when she saw it and she nodded. "That was taken at Walter Reed Medical Center about 3 months after the explosion. He'd had 4 surgeries by then and they still had more to do, but he couldn't take it anymore. He left the hospital one night and came home, and that's when he told me his plan." She took the photo from my hand and stared at it for a long moment. "I should have told you when you turned 18, both of you. Should have given you the choice to know or not know. But I was scared you'd hate him for abandoning you, or hate me for lying. So I just kept the secret and hoped it would never come out." Natalie had stopped crying and was staring at nothing, processing everything she'd just learned. "So where is he now? What does he do? How does he live?" Mom tucked the photo into her pocket and sat back down on the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. "He's homeless mostly, lives on the streets downtown, moves around to different shelters. He doesn't want help, doesn't want anyone to see him or know who he is. I've tried to get him to accept money or housing, but he refuses everything except letting me keep a bank account for him that he never touches." I sat down next to her, my mind reeling with questions. "Have you seen him? Recently?" Mom nodded. "I see him about once a month. He has a spot under the highway overpass where he usually stays. I bring him food and clean clothes, and we sit together for a little while. He asks about you girls, wants to know everything you're doing. I show him pictures on my phone and tell him about school and your jobs and your lives. The thought of my father living on the streets while we'd been going about our comfortable lives made me feel sick. Why didn't he ever try to see us? Even from far away?" Mom's voice was barely audible when she answered. "He did. He came to every school play, every graduation, every important event. He'd stand at the back where no one could see him clearly, or watch from outside the windows. There were times when you walked right past him on the street and didn't recognize him. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos, then handed it to me. The screen showed a man bundled in layers of worn clothing, sitting on a bench in a park I recognized from near our house. His face was turned away from the camera, but I could see the scarring on his neck, and something about the set of his shoulders looked familiar. That was taken last month, Mom said quietly. He was at the park watching Natalie play softball. I took the picture because I wanted to remember him being part of her life even if she didn't know it. Natalie came over and looked at the phone, tears running down her face again. Can we see him? Please, Mom. I need to see him with my own eyes and know this is real. Mom hesitated, and I could see the conflict playing out on her face. I don't know if he'd want that. He's been so adamant about keeping his distance, about not wanting you to see what he's become. Grandma Eleanor's voice cut through from her chair. He's dying too, Rebecca. Maybe not as fast as me, but living on the streets at his age with his injuries and his mental state, he won't last much longer. These girls deserve the chance to know their father before it's too late for both of us. Mom looked at me and Natalie, and I could see the moment she made her decision. Okay, tomorrow. I'll take you to where he usually is, but I can't promise he'll talk to you. Sometimes he's not having a good day and he can't communicate much. And you need to be prepared for how he looks. The scarring is extensive and he's aged a lot from living rough. That night I couldn't sleep, lying in my childhood bed staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling that Dad had put up before he deployed. Everything I thought I knew about my past had been rewritten in a single evening. The hero father who died serving his country was actually a broken man living in the shadows of our city, too damaged to be part of our lives but unable to completely let us go. I thought about all the times I'd felt like someone was watching me, all the strange gifts and cards that had appeared with no explanation. I'd always assumed they were from a kind neighbor or distant relative, never imagining they were from my supposedly dead father. Morning came with gray skies and the threat of rain. Mom was already up making coffee, looking like she'd slept even less than me. Natalie appeared in pajamas with puffy eyes, and we all sat around the kitchen table in silence. I need to call him first, Mom finally said. He has a phone I gave him for emergencies. I'll let him know we're coming so he doesn't run when he sees you. She stepped into the other room and I could hear her voice speaking softly, though I couldn't make out the words. When she came back, her expression was troubled. He answered, but he's not doing well today. Said he's been awake for 3 days and the dreams won't stop. This might not be the best time. I stood up, my decision made. I'm going whether it's the best time or not. I've waited 15 years already. Natalie nodded in agreement and went to get dressed. An hour later, we were driving downtown into an area I'd never spent much time in. The buildings were older here, some abandoned and covered in graffiti. Homeless encampments clustered under overpasses and in empty lots. Mom parked on a side street near a concrete bridge where the highway passed over the city. He's usually under here, she said, grabbing bags of food from the trunk. But he might have moved to one of his other spots if he's having a bad day. We walked under the bridge and the temperature dropped immediately, the air damp and smelling of concrete and exhaust. There were maybe a dozen people living under here in various makeshift shelters made of tarps and cardboard. Most of them ignored us, lost in their own struggles. Mom led us to the far corner where a blue tarp was strung between the bridge support and a shopping cart, creating a small enclosed space. Daniel? She called softly. It's me. I brought the girls like I said I would. Can we come in? There was a long silence, and then a voice I didn't recognize said, You shouldn't have brought them here, Rebecca. I told you not to. Mom pulled back the tarp and we followed her into the dim space. A man sat on a pile of blankets with his back against the concrete wall. He wore a hooded sweatshirt pulled low over his face, but I could see the scarring on his hands and neck. He didn't look up as we entered, keeping his head down and his hands clasped in his lap. Girls, this is your father, Mom said, her voice shaking. Daniel, these are your daughters. They wanted to meet you. I knelt down in front of him, my heart pounding. Dad? The word felt strange on my tongue after so many years of only saying it about a dead man. He flinched at the sound of it but still didn't look up. You shouldn't see me like this. Your mother should have kept the secret. You're better off thinking I'm dead. His voice was rough and tired, nothing like the recordings I'd heard of him from before his deployment. Those videos showed a man who laughed easily and spoke with confidence. This man sounded hollow, defeated. Natalie sat down on his other side, and I saw his hands start trembling. We're not better off, she said firmly. We spent 15 years mourning someone who was alive the whole time. How is that better? He finally lifted his head and pushed back his hood, and I had to force myself not to gasp. The scarring was worse than I'd imagined, covering the entire left side of his face and neck in thick, ropey tissue that pulled at his mouth and eye. But underneath the damage, I could still see my father's features. The same blue eyes Natalie had inherited, the same shaped nose I saw in my own reflection, the same ears that stuck out slightly, which had always made him self-conscious in photos. There, he said bitterly. Now you've seen the monster. Are you satisfied? I reached out and took his scarred hand in mine, and he tried to pull away, but I held on. You're not a monster. You're my dad, and I've missed you every single day for 15 years. His face crumpled and tears started running down both sides, the scarred and the unscarred. I wanted to be there for everything, he whispered. Every birthday, every first day of school, every time you needed me. But I couldn't be the father you deserved. Natalie took his other hand, and we sat there like that. The three of us connected for the first time since I was 6 years old. Mom stood behind us crying silently. You were there, I said. Mom told us. You came to everything. You just hid. But you were there. He nodded, unable to speak. We sat under that bridge for over an hour while he told us about the explosion that had changed everything. He'd been in a vehicle convoy when an IED detonated directly under his Humvee. The explosion had killed 2 of his friends instantly and trapped him in the burning wreckage. By the time they pulled him out, half his face was melted and his lungs were damaged from inhaling superheated air. He'd spent 18 months in military hospitals undergoing surgeries and skin grafts, but the mental wounds were worse than the physical ones. He couldn't sleep without seeing the faces of the men who'd died, couldn't handle crowds or sudden noises, couldn't look at himself without seeing a monster. When they finally released me, I came home planning to try to make things work, he said, his voice raw from talking more than he had in years. But I saw the way people looked at me, saw the fear in children's eyes, saw you girls staring at me like I was a stranger, and I realized I wasn't helping anyone by being there. Mom had tried to convince him to stay, to let them help him adjust, but he'd been determined. He'd made her promise to tell everyone he'd died, to let him fade away so they could all move on with their lives. She'd fought it for months, but eventually agreed when he said the alternative was him actually ending his life. At least this way. She could still see him, could still know he existed somewhere in the world. I got good at being invisible, he continued. Living on the streets, you learn how to blend in, how to disappear into the background. I could be 30 feet away from you, and you'd never notice me. He described watching us grow up from a distance, being present for moments we'd never known about. He'd been at the hospital the night Natalie broke her arm falling off her bike. He'd been in the parking lot when I got my driver's license. He'd stood outside the church at Grandma's husband's funeral. Always there, always watching, never acknowledged. Didn't it kill you? I asked, being so close but never being able to talk to us. He nodded slowly. Every single day. But I thought it was better than the alternative. Better than you having a father who scared you or embarrassed you or couldn't function in normal society. Natalie spoke up then, her voice angry. That wasn't your choice to make. We should have been able to decide if we wanted you in our lives or not. Instead, you and Mom decided for us, and we lost 15 years. He didn't have an answer for that, just sat there looking ashamed. Mom finally spoke from behind us. She's right, Daniel. We were wrong to keep this secret as long as we did. But I'm telling you now, and I'm not letting you hide anymore. These girls need their father, and you need them. He looked up at her with fear clear on his face. I can't go back to being normal. I can't live in a house or hold a job or be around people. Too much is broken inside me. Mom knelt down beside us. Then we'll figure out what you can do. Maybe it's getting you into better housing, or connecting you with the VA for proper treatment. Maybe it's just regular visits with your daughters, but you don't have to live under a bridge anymore. Over the next few weeks, we slowly began rebuilding some kind of relationship with our father. It was awkward and painful and complicated, but it was real in a way that the sanitized hero we'd been mourning never was. Mom helped him get into a veterans housing program that gave him a small studio apartment with support services. He resisted at first, but she wore him down with persistence and guilt. Natalie and I started visiting him twice a week, bringing food and just sitting with him while he adjusted to having walls and a roof again. He still had terrible days when he couldn't handle being inside and would disappear back to his spot under the bridge. Days when the nightmares were so bad he couldn't speak or make eye contact. Days when he was convinced he was still in Afghanistan and we were strangers trying to hurt him. But there were also good days when he could tell us stories about his childhood, or teach us things he'd learned in the army, or just exist in the same room without falling apart. Grandma Eleanor held on longer than her doctors expected, maybe because she wanted to see her son getting help before she died. We moved her into hospice care in November, and she spent her last weeks with family around her constantly. Dad visited her every day, sitting by her bed and holding her hand while she slept. Thank you for not taking my secret to your grave, Mom, he told her one afternoon when it was just the two of them. You gave me my daughters back. She passed away peacefully in December with all of us there. At her funeral, Dad stood at the back of the church wearing a suit Mom had bought him, his scars visible but his head held high. Several people did double takes when they recognized him, whispering to each other about the dead soldier who'd returned. After the service, some of his old army buddies approached him hesitantly. They'd attended his memorial service 15 years ago, had mourned him as fallen. Now here he was, alive and aged and damaged but real. We thought you were gone, Danny, one of them said with tears in his eyes. Dad's voice was rough when he responded. Part of me was. Part of me still is. But I'm trying to find my way back. They embraced him carefully, and I saw my father cry in the arms of men who'd known him before the war changed everything. It wasn't a happy ending because there was still too much damage, too many years lost, too much pain that couldn't be undone. But it was real and honest and true, which was more than we'd had before. Dad started attending therapy at the VA, finally getting treatment for his PTSD and depression after years of self-medicating with isolation. The therapist said he had a long road ahead of him, but that he'd taken the hardest step by simply showing up. Natalie struggled with her anger, going through her own counseling to process the betrayal she felt. Some days she couldn't stand to be around either of our parents, furious at them both for the lie. Other days she'd show up at Dad's apartment unannounced just to sit with him in silence. I found myself somewhere in between, understanding why they'd made the choices they had but grieving for the relationship we'd lost. I looked through old photos and videos with new eyes, knowing that the man we'd buried hadn't existed. Every memory was recontextualized, every milestone now shadowed by the knowledge that he'd been there watching from the darkness. On what would have been my father's official death anniversary, we went to his grave together. The headstone was still there with his name and the wrong death date. Should we have it removed? Natalie asked, staring at the engraved letters. Dad shook his head. Leave it. That version of me did die over there. Maybe not physically, but the man who left for that deployment never came home. We stood there in the cold January wind while he said goodbye to the person he used to be. By spring, Dad had been in his apartment for 4 months and was starting to venture out more. He still couldn't handle crowds or loud places, but he could walk through the park or sit in a quiet coffee shop. Mom convinced him to attend a support group for veterans with PTSD, and he met other men who understood what he'd been through. They exchanged phone numbers and started meeting for breakfast once a week, giving each other permission to be broken without shame. One Saturday, Dad asked if we wanted to go to the batting cages. It was something he used to do with me before his deployment, though I barely remembered it. We drove to the facility, and I watched him struggle with the noise of the machines and the other people around us. But he pushed through the discomfort, standing beside me while I swung at pitch after pitch. "You've got a good swing," he said after I connected solidly with a fastball. Better than mine ever was. It was such a normal father-daughter interaction that it made my throat tight with emotion. This was what we'd missed. These small, ordinary moments that added up to a relationship. We couldn't get the lost years back, but maybe we could build something new from the wreckage. Natalie's graduation came in June, and Dad asked if he could attend. "I've watched from the parking lot before," he said quietly. "But I'd like to actually be there this time if you want me." Natalie had grown more comfortable with him over the months, her anger softening into something more complicated but also more real. "I want you there," she said. Not hiding, not watching from far away. Actually there. On graduation day, Dad sat between me and Mom in the third row. He wore the same suit from Grandma's funeral and held my hand when his anxiety got too overwhelming. When they called Natalie's name and she walked across that stage, he stood up and cheered louder than anyone else in the gymnasium. She looked right at him and smiled, her first genuine smile directed at him since learning he was alive. After the ceremony, we took family photos together for the first time in 15 years. The photographer looked confused when Mom explained that yes, this was her husband, and yes, he'd been gone, but now he was back. The pictures show all 4 of us standing together, Dad's scars visible but his arm around my shoulders and pride clear on his face. That summer we established new traditions, replacing the ones built around his absence with ones that acknowledged his presence. Sunday dinners at Mom's house with Dad invited every week. He often couldn't stay long, but he always came. Monthly camping trips where the quiet of nature helped him feel calmer. Regular phone calls where he'd check in on us or just listen to us talk about our days. It wasn't a normal family by any standard definition, but it was ours, and it was honest. We stopped pretending his damage didn't exist, and instead found ways to work around it. On the first anniversary of Grandma Eleanor telling me the truth, I visited her grave with Dad. "She saved us all," he said, laying flowers on her headstone. "She gave me the push I needed to stop hiding, and she gave you girls your father back." I leaned against him carefully, always aware that touch could sometimes be difficult for him. "She was brave when no one else could be, including you." He didn't argue with that assessment. We'd all been cowards in our own ways, choosing comfortable lies over difficult truths. But Grandma had forced us to face reality, and while it had been painful, it had also been necessary. As we walked back to the car, Dad paused and looked at me seriously. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for your childhood. Sorry you had to grow up thinking your father was dead. Sorry for all the years we lost." I took his scarred hand in mine. "I'm sorry too. Sorry you went through what you did. Sorry the system failed you when you came home. Sorry you felt like you had to disappear." We stood there in the cemetery acknowledging all the sorrows that had shaped our family. Then we got in the car and drove home together, father and daughter, damaged but real, lost but slowly finding our way back. The man who'd died in Afghanistan was still dead, buried under that headstone with the wrong date. But the man who'd survived, scarred and broken and afraid, was learning to live again. And we were learning to love him, not despite his damage, but with it. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.